Gaslighting, the insidious art of distorting reality. Gaslighting is a psychological manipulation technique that plays with the very fabric of someone's reality, making them question their sanity, memory, and perception. At its core, gaslighting involves subtle or overt actions by a manipulator to distort facts, creating a foggy space where victims feel confused and unsure about what is real. This tactic is particularly insidious because it undermines the victim's trust in their own experiences and thoughts, leading them to doubt even their most basic instincts. Imagine living in a world where you constantly second-guess yourself, wondering if your memories are accurate or if events happen the way you remember them. This is the reality for those subjected to gaslighting. A classic example occurs in personal relationships, where one partner might deny saying hurtful things they clearly said, insisting instead that the other person is misremembering or imagining things. Over time, this repeated denial can make the victim question their memory and sanity. Consider a scenario where Sarah repeatedly tells her boyfriend, Mark, that he promised to attend her birthday party. However, each time she brings it up, Mark denies ever making such promise. He might go further by suggesting that Sarah is too sensitive or prone to misunderstandings, planting seeds of doubt in her mind. As this pattern continues, Sarah begins to wonder if she imagined the conversation or exaggerated its importance, leading to a profound erosion of her confidence and clarity. The effects of gaslighting extend far beyond mere confusion. Victims often experience anxiety, depression, and a pervasive sense of helplessness. They may isolate themselves from friends and family, believing that others won't understand or will side with the manipulator. This isolation not only exacerbates their mental health issues, but also strengthens the manipulator's hold over them. To illustrate further, consider an office setting where a manager consistently belittles an employee's achievements while praising their work publicly to others. When confronted, the manager dismisses the employee's concerns as oversensitivity or misunderstanding. Over time, the employee begins to doubt their abilities and contributions, feeling increasingly trapped in a cycle of self-doubt and dependency on the manager's skewed feedback. Understanding gaslighting is crucial because it highlights how easily one's reality can be manipulated by another. Recognizing these patterns, whether in personal relationships, workplaces, or social interactions, is the first step towards breaking free from such toxic dynamics. By acknowledging the signs and trusting one's instincts, individuals can begin to reclaim their sense of reality and rebuild their confidence. In sum, gaslighting is more than just a deceptive tactic. It's a powerful tool that can unravel someone's psyche. It thrives on confusion and self-doubt, leaving victims vulnerable and dependent on their manipulators. Through awareness and education, we can arm ourselves against such manipulative behaviors, fostering environments where truth and trust prevail over deceit and distortion. Guilt tripping, the weight of emotional manipulation. Guilt tripping is a dark psychological tactic where one person exploits another's sense of guilt to manipulate their behavior. This technique is especially potent because it taps into deeply ingrained feelings of obligation and responsibility, making the victim feel as though they have no choice but to comply. Whether in personal relationships, families, or workplaces, guilt tripping thrives on emotional pressure, forcing the target to act in ways they wouldn't otherwise choose. At its heart, guilt tripping works by framing the manipulator as the victim and the target as the cause of their suffering. This reversal creates an imbalance of power, where the target feels compelled to fix the situation, even if it wasn't their fault. For instance, imagine a parent telling their child, "After all I've done for you, this is how you repay me?" The child, burdened by years of care and love, feels immense pressure to meet the parent's demands, even if those demands are unreasonable or unfair. The parent, knowingly or unknowingly, uses guilt as a weapon to control the child's actions. This manipulation isn't limited to familial dynamics. In romantic relationships, guilt tripping can take on a more insidious form. Consider a partner who says, "If you really loved me, you'd spend less time with your friends." Here, the manipulator weaponizes love itself, implying that the victim's choices reflect a lack of affection. The target, desperate to prove their love, might sacrifice their own needs or boundaries, leading to resentment and imbalance in the relationship. Workplaces are another fertile ground for guilt tripping. Picture a boss who says, "Everyone else is willing to stay late to finish this project. Are you not as committed as the rest of the team?" This statement not only pressures the employee to conform, but also isolates them, making them feel like an outsider if they refuse. The implied threat that their job security or reputation depends on compliance can be paralyzing, leaving the employee with little room to negotiate or assert their boundaries. One of the most damaging aspects of guilt tripping is how it erodes the victim's self-esteem. Over time, the constant barrage of guilt-inducing statements makes them question their worth and decisions. They may start to believe they are inherently selfish or inadequate, internalizing the manipulator's narrative. This internalization can lead to chronic stress, anxiety, and even depression, as the victim struggles to reconcile their sense of self with the distorted image painted by the manipulator. A poignant example of guilt tripping's long-term impact can be seen in friendships. Imagine a friend who frequently cancels plans at the last minute, but becomes upset when you decline their invitations. They might say, "I always make time for you, but you never do the same for me." While the statement might seem valid on the surface, it ignores their own pattern of unreliability. The friend being targeted may feel torn between asserting their boundaries and maintaining the friendship, ultimately sacrificing their own well-being to avoid conflict. Breaking free from guilt tripping requires recognizing its patterns and understanding that guilt does not equal responsibility. Not every demand wrapped in guilt is legitimate, and it's okay to prioritize your own needs. Setting clear boundaries and communicating openly can help dismantle the manipulator's control. For instance, responding to guilt-inducing statements with calm assertions like, "I understand you're upset, but I need to take care of myself too," can shift the dynamic and empower the victim to reclaim their agency. Ultimately, guilt tripping is a corrosive force that preys on empathy and kindness. By exploiting these virtues, manipulators create a cycle of obligation and compliance that benefits them at the expense of their victims. Understanding this tactic and learning to resist it is essential for fostering healthier, more balanced relationships. After all, guilt should never be a tool for control. It should remain a natural response to genuine wrongdoing, not a weapon wielded to manipulate others. Love bombing, the dangerous allure of excessive affection. Love bombing is a manipulative tactic that floods someone with excessive attention, affection, and praise early in a relationship to establish control and dependency. At first glance, it might seem like a dream come true, a whirlwind romance filled with grand gestures, heartfelt compliments, and constant reassurance. However, beneath the surface lies a calculated strategy to overwhelm the recipient emotionally, creating a sense of obligation and attachment that serves the manipulator's agenda. This technique is particularly dangerous because it disguises itself as genuine love, making it difficult for the victim to recognize the manipulation until it's too late. Imagine meeting someone who seems perfect, charming, attentive, and deeply invested in your happiness. They shower you with gifts, plan elaborate dates, and text you constantly throughout the day. At first, it feels exhilarating. You might think this is what true love feels like, but as the intensity builds, so does the pressure. The manipulator might start making unreasonable demands, expecting you to reciprocate their level of devotion or drop everything to accommodate them. If you hesitate or express discomfort, they might guilt trip you by saying, "I thought you cared about me," or "No one has ever loved you like I do." The overwhelming affection that once felt magical now feels suffocating, but by then, you're already emotionally entangled. A common example of love bombing occurs in online dating. Picture Sarah, who meets a man named Jake on a dating app. From the start, Jake is incredibly attentive. He sends her dozens of messages a day, calls her his soulmate after just 2 weeks, and even surprises her with expensive gifts. Sarah is swept off her feet, feeling like she's found the partner she's always dreamed of. But soon, Jake starts to change. He becomes possessive, demanding that Sarah cut ties with her friends because they don't understand their connection. When Sarah tries to set boundaries, Jake accuses her of being ungrateful and threatens to end the relationship. The fear of losing him, coupled with the intense emotional investment she's made, traps Sarah in a cycle of compliance and self-doubt. Love bombing doesn't always happen in romantic contexts. It can also occur in friendships, mentorships, or even professional settings. For instance, a new coworker might go out of their way to compliment you, offer unsolicited help, and invite you to social events. At first, it feels flattering, but over time, they might use the bond they've created to exploit your time, resources, or goodwill. You might find yourself feeling obligated to cover for them at work or lend them money, even when it's inconvenient for you. The psychological effects of love bombing can be devastating. Victims often experience confusion, anxiety, and a loss of self-worth. The initial high of being adored gives way to a sense of entrapment as the manipulator tightens their grip. They might alternate between extreme affection and cold indifference, creating a trauma bond that keeps the victim hooked. This push-and-pull dynamic leaves the victim questioning their own judgment and clinging to the hope that the manipulator will return to their loving persona. One of the reasons love bombing is so effective is that it preys on universal human desires for validation and connection. Everyone wants to feel loved and appreciated, and love bombers exploit this vulnerability by creating an illusion of intimacy. They study their target's insecurities and preferences, tailoring their behavior to maximize emotional impact. For example, if someone craves stability, the manipulator might present themselves as a reliable anchor in an unpredictable world. If someone fears abandonment, the manipulator might emphasize their unwavering loyalty. These calculated moves make it easier for the victim to overlook red flags and rationalize the manipulator's behavior. Recognizing love bombing requires a keen awareness of its warning signs. If someone is excessively complimentary, overly eager to move the relationship forward, or dismissive of your boundaries, it's important to pause and reflect. Ask yourself, does this person respect my autonomy? Do they give me space to breathe, or do they demand constant attention? Healthy relationships thrive on balance and mutual respect, not one-sided intensity. Breaking free from love bombing can be challenging, but it's possible with self-awareness and support. Start by setting firm boundaries and communicating your needs clearly. Surround yourself with trusted friends or family members who can provide perspective and encouragement. Most importantly, remind yourself that love should never feel suffocating or conditional. True affection empowers and uplifts, whereas love bombing seeks to control and dominate. In essence, love bombing is a wolf in sheep's clothing, a tactic that uses the language of love to manipulate and dominate. By understanding its mechanics and staying vigilant, you can protect yourself from falling prey to this insidious form of emotional exploitation. Remember, love should make you feel safe and valued, not trapped and diminished. Triangulation, the intricate web of manipulation. Triangulation is a sophisticated psychological manipulation technique where a manipulator introduces or involves a third party to create conflict, jealousy, or isolation within a relationship. This tactic is particularly cunning because it leverages the dynamics between multiple individuals, often pitting them against each other to serve the manipulator's interests. By doing so, the manipulator not only destabilizes existing relationships, but also positions themselves as the central figure controlling the narrative and emotions of everyone involved. Consider a workplace scenario where Alex, a team leader, subtly pits two colleagues, Jamie and Taylor, against each other. Alex might commend Jamie's recent project success in front of Taylor, hinting that Jamie's approach is superior. Simultaneously, Alex confides in Jamie about Taylor's supposed dissatisfaction with Jamie's leadership style. This orchestrated triangulation fosters mistrust and rivalry between Jamie and Taylor, distracting them from addressing any real issues with Alex's management. Meanwhile, Alex maintains control by keeping both parties focused on competing with each other rather than questioning their own position. In personal relationships, triangulation often manifests through romantic entanglements. Imagine a situation where Sam, in a relationship with Riley, frequently mentions a close friend, Jordan, in glowing terms. Sam might share stories about Jordan's accomplishments or casually mention how supportive Jordan has been during tough times. Though Sam insists there's nothing romantic between them, Riley starts feeling insecure and threatened by Jordan's presence. This insecurity stems not from any real threat, but from Sam's deliberate comparisons and shared intimacies with Jordan, designed to make Riley feel replaceable or inadequate. Family dynamics are also fertile grounds for triangulation. Take the case of a mother who constantly compares her two children, Emily and Noah, suggesting that Emily is more responsible and successful. The mother might then confide in Emily about Noah's shortcomings, urging her to take on more responsibilities to compensate. This triangulation not only breeds resentment between the siblings, but also places undue pressure on Emily, who feels compelled to live up to her mother's expectations while managing her strained relationship with Noah. The effectiveness of triangulation lies in its ability to confuse and destabilize. By introducing a third party into the mix, the manipulator creates a complex web of emotions, jealousy, insecurity, competition, that distracts the victims from the manipulator's true intentions. The victims become so engrossed in navigating their altered relationships with each other that they fail to see the manipulator's role in orchestrating the chaos. Moreover, triangulation often leads to a breakdown in communication. Victims may find themselves withholding information or becoming overly defensive, fearing that anything they say could be used against them. This breakdown not only isolates the victims from each other, but also from external support systems, as they become increasingly dependent on the manipulator for guidance and validation. To counteract triangulation, victims must first recognize its patterns. Pay attention to situations where a third party is consistently brought into discussions or conflicts. Question whether the involvement of this third party is genuinely necessary, or if it serves to complicate matters unnecessarily. Open, honest communication with the other affected party is crucial. Discussing feelings and perceptions without the manipulator present can help clarify misunderstandings and rebuild trust. Ultimately, triangulation is a manipulative strategy that thrives on confusion and division. By understanding its mechanisms and actively working to dismantle its effects, individuals can protect their relationships from the corrosive influence of this insidious tactic. Awareness and communication are the keys to breaking free from the tangled web of triangulation and restoring balance and harmony to interpersonal dynamics. Playing the victim, the masterstroke of manipulative sympathy. Playing the victim is a psychological manipulation technique where an individual consistently portrays themselves as the injured party, regardless of the actual circumstances. This tactic is particularly effective because it appeals to the innate human desire to help and empathize, creating a dynamic where the manipulator garners sympathy and avoids accountability. By positioning themselves as perpetually wronged, they sidestep responsibility and shift the focus onto others, often leaving their victims burdened with guilt or frustration. Imagine a colleague, Emma, who consistently blames others for her mistakes. During a team meeting, Emma presents a report riddled with errors. Instead of acknowledging her oversight, she immediately deflects, claiming that her workload was unmanageable due to unrealistic deadlines set by her manager. She might add, "I've been working so hard, and no one appreciates the pressure I'm under." Her dramatic portrayal of herself as a martyr elicits sympathy from her coworkers, who begin to question whether the manager was indeed being unreasonable. Meanwhile, Emma escapes scrutiny and avoids taking responsibility for her subpar performance. In personal relationships, playing the victim often takes on a more emotional tone. Consider a friend, Jake, who frequently complains about how others mistreat him. After canceling plans with his best friend, Mia, For the third time in a row, Jake accuses her of being unsupportive when she expresses disappointment. He might say, "You're always so critical of me. No one understands how hard my life is right now." By framing himself as the victim of Mia's supposed lack of empathy, Jake shifts the blame onto her, leaving her feeling guilty for simply addressing his behavior. Over time, Mia might suppress her own feelings and needs to avoid further conflict, inadvertently enabling Jake's manipulative tendencies. The danger of playing the victim lies in its ability to distort reality. The manipulator crafts a narrative where they are perpetually powerless and unfairly treated, regardless of evidence to the contrary. This narrative not only absolves them of accountability, but also forces others to adopt a caretaker role. Victims of this manipulation often find themselves bending over backward to appease the manipulator, hoping to alleviate their perceived suffering. However, this rarely satisfies the manipulator, who thrives on the attention and validation their victimhood elicits. A striking example of playing the victim occurs in romantic relationships. Picture a partner, Ryan, who accuses his significant other, Sarah, of being neglectful whenever she prioritizes her career or personal growth. He might lament, "You're always putting work before me. I guess I'll just be alone again tonight." By casting himself as the abandoned lover, Ryan manipulates Sarah into feeling guilty for pursuing her goals. Sarah, wanting to avoid conflict and prove her love, might sacrifice her ambitions to cater to Ryan's demands. This dynamic reinforces Ryan's victim mentality while eroding Sarah's sense of independence and self-worth. Playing the victim is particularly insidious because it exploits the empathy of others. Humans are naturally inclined to help those in distress, and manipulators capitalize on this instinct. They craft elaborate stories of hardship, often exaggerating or fabricating details to evoke a stronger emotional response. For instance, a manipulative sibling might claim that their parents favor their brother, painting themselves as the overlooked and undervalued child. Even if the claim is baseless, the emotional weight of the accusation can sow discord within the family, diverting attention away from the manipulator's own shortcomings. The psychological toll on those subjected to this manipulation can be significant. Victims often experience frustration, helplessness, and even burnout as they struggle to address the manipulator's endless grievances. Over time, they may begin to doubt their own perceptions, questioning whether they are indeed the problem. This self-doubt can lead to a loss of confidence and an inability to assert boundaries, further empowering the manipulator. Breaking free from the cycle of playing the victim requires a combination of awareness and action. First, recognize the pattern. Is the individual consistently portraying themselves as the injured party, regardless of context? Do they avoid taking responsibility for their actions, instead blaming others or external circumstances? Once identified, it's crucial to avoid enabling their behavior. Refuse to accept their narrative without evidence and hold them accountable for their actions. For example, if a coworker blames their poor performance on external factors, calmly point out the discrepancies and encourage them to take ownership. Setting boundaries is equally important. Victims of this manipulation must learn to prioritize their own well-being and communicate their limits clearly. If a friend or partner consistently plays the victim to manipulate you, express how their behavior affects you and establish consequences if it continues. For instance, you might say, "I care about you, but I can't keep dropping everything to address your complaints. I need us to focus on solutions, not blame." Ultimately, playing the victim is a calculated strategy to evade accountability and manipulate others. By understanding its mechanics and refusing to be drawn into the manipulator's narrative, individuals can protect themselves from its corrosive effects. Empathy is a valuable trait, but it should never be exploited to justify evasion of responsibility. Recognizing and resisting this tactic is key to fostering healthier, more balanced relationships. Emotional blackmail, the hidden weapon of fear and obligation. Emotional blackmail is a psychological manipulation technique that uses threats, often veiled or implied, to control someone's behavior by exploiting their fears, obligations, or vulnerabilities. Unlike overt forms of coercion, emotional blackmail operates in the shadows, subtly undermining the victim's autonomy and decision-making. It thrives on creating a sense of dread, guilt, or inadequacy, leaving the victim feeling trapped between compliance and the fear of consequences. This tactic is particularly insidious because it leverages deep-seated emotions, making it difficult for the victim to recognize the manipulation or resist its pull. At its core, emotional blackmail involves a manipulator presenting a choice that isn't really a choice at all. The options are framed in such a way that one path leads to safety and approval, while the other results in rejection, anger, or harm. For instance, a parent might say to their child, "If you don't visit me this weekend, I'll know you don't care about me anymore." On the surface, this statement might seem like a harmless expression of disappointment, but it carries an implicit threat. Define me, and you risk losing my love or approval. The child, bound by filial duty and fear of abandonment, feels pressured to comply, even if they had prior commitments or needed time for themselves. In romantic relationships, emotional blackmail often takes on a more dramatic and destructive form. Consider a partner who says, "If you leave me, I don't know what I'll do. Maybe I'll just disappear forever." This chilling declaration isn't just an expression of sadness. It's a calculated attempt to instill fear and guilt. The manipulator knows that their partner values their well-being and would do almost anything to prevent harm. By weaponizing their own potential despair or self-harm, they effectively hold the relationship hostage, ensuring compliance through emotional coercion. Workplace dynamics are another fertile ground for emotional blackmail. Imagine a boss who says to an employee, "You know how much I've done for your career. If you don't stay late tonight, I might have to reconsider your future here." The employee, aware of the boss's influence over their professional trajectory, feels cornered. The implied threat, losing their job or stagnating in their career, forces them to sacrifice their personal time and well-being. Over time, this pattern of manipulation can lead to burnout, resentment, and a toxic work environment. What makes emotional blackmail so effective is its reliance on emotional triggers. The manipulator identifies what the victim values most, whether it's love, security, approval, or fear of conflict, and uses it as leverage. For example, a manipulative friend might say, "If you were really my friend, you'd lend me the money I need." By framing their request as a test of loyalty, they exploit the victim's desire to maintain the friendship, even if lending the money would cause financial strain. The victim, caught between their principles and the fear of losing the relationship, often caves under pressure. The psychological impact of emotional blackmail can be devastating. Victims often experience chronic anxiety, self-doubt, and a pervasive sense of helplessness. They may feel as though they're walking on eggshells, constantly trying to anticipate the manipulator's demands and avoid triggering their wrath. Over time, this dynamic erodes their self-esteem and autonomy, leaving them dependent on the manipulator's approval to feel secure. They might also develop a distorted sense of responsibility, believing they are obligated to fix or manage the manipulator's emotions, even at great personal cost. A poignant example of emotional blackmail can be seen in family dynamics involving caregiving. An elderly parent might say to their adult child, "If you put me in a nursing home, I'll never forgive you." This statement taps into the child's sense of duty and fear of societal judgment, making them feel guilty for considering alternative care arrangements. The parent, aware of their child's emotional vulnerability, uses this guilt to maintain control over their living situation, even if a nursing home might be the safest and most practical option. Recognizing emotional blackmail requires a keen awareness of its patterns and underlying motivations. Look for signs of ultimatums, whether explicit or implied. Does the manipulator frame their requests in terms of "if you loved me, you would," or "you owe me this"? Do they use fear or guilt to pressure you into compliance? Once identified, it's crucial to resist the urge to capitulate immediately. Instead, pause and reflect on the situation. Ask yourself, Am I making this decision out of genuine desire, or am I responding to fear or obligation? Setting boundaries is essential for breaking free from emotional blackmail. Communicate your limits clearly and assertively, even if it feels uncomfortable. For example, you might say, "I care about you, but I can't make decisions based on fear or guilt. Let's find a solution that works for both of us." Surround yourself with supportive friends or family members who can provide perspective and encouragement. Most importantly, remind yourself that you are not responsible for managing the manipulator's emotions or solving their problems. In essence, emotional blackmail is a pernicious form of manipulation that thrives on fear, guilt, and obligation. By understanding its tactics and learning to resist its pull, individuals can reclaim their autonomy and foster healthier, more balanced relationships. Love and care should never come at the expense of one's well-being. True connections are built on mutual respect, not coercion. Silent treatment. The chilling power of withheld communication. The silent treatment is a psychological manipulation technique that involves deliberately withholding communication as a form of punishment or control. This tactic is deceptively simple yet profoundly impactful, as it exploits the human need for connection and validation. By refusing to engage, speak, or acknowledge someone, the manipulator creates an atmosphere of tension, uncertainty, and emotional distress. The silent treatment is particularly insidious because it operates in silence, leaving the victim to grapple with unanswered questions and mounting anxiety. Imagine a scenario where a partner suddenly stops speaking after an argument. They refuse to answer texts, ignore phone calls, and maintain a stoic demeanor when in the same room. The absence of communication feels like a void, amplifying the victim's feelings of rejection and confusion. They might replay the argument in their mind, wondering what they did wrong or how they can fix the situation. This internal turmoil is precisely what the manipulator intends to provoke. By withholding interaction, they force the victim into a state of emotional labor, where they must decipher the unspoken rules and navigate the manipulator's expectations. The silent treatment is not limited to romantic relationships. It can occur in friendships, families, and workplaces as well. Consider a parent who refuses to speak to their child after a disagreement. The child, desperate for reconciliation, might apologize profusely or go out of their way to please the parent, even if they believe they were in the right. The parent's silence becomes a weapon, leveraging the child's fear of abandonment or disapproval to enforce compliance. Over time, this dynamic erodes the child's self-confidence and teaches them to prioritize others' approval over their own convictions. In professional settings, the silent treatment can manifest in subtle but damaging ways. Picture a manager who ignores an employee's emails or excludes them from meetings after a minor disagreement. The employee, unsure of how to mend a rift, might overcompensate by working longer hours or seeking unnecessary approval. The manager's silence creates a power imbalance, reinforcing their authority while leaving the employee feeling isolated and uncertain. This tactic not only stifles open communication, but also fosters a toxic work environment where fear replaces collaboration. The psychological effects of the silent treatment are profound. Victims often experience feelings of worthlessness, anxiety, and self-doubt. The lack of feedback leaves them questioning their actions, words, and even their value as a person. They might internalize the silence as a reflection of their inadequacy, leading to a distorted sense of self-worth. Over time, this emotional toll can result in chronic stress, depression, and a reluctance to assert boundaries in future relationships. A poignant example of the silent treatment's impact can be seen in sibling dynamics. Imagine two brothers, Alex and Ben, who have a falling out over a shared inheritance. Alex, feeling betrayed, decides to cut off all communication with Ben. He stops responding to texts, avoids family gatherings, and pretends Ben doesn't exist. Ben, caught off guard by the sudden estrangement, feels a mix of guilt, anger, and helplessness. He might reach out repeatedly, only to be met with silence, which compounds his frustration. The unresolved conflict festers, creating a rift that neither brother knows how to bridge. The silent treatment is particularly effective because it preys on the victim's need for closure. Humans are wired to seek resolution, and the absence of communication leaves the situation open-ended, fueling speculation and self-blame. The manipulator, by remaining silent, retains control over the narrative, dictating when or if the interaction will resume. This power dynamic forces the victim into a reactive role, where they must constantly adapt to the manipulator's whims. Breaking free from the silent treatment requires a combination of self-awareness and assertiveness. Recognize that silence is not a neutral stance. It is a deliberate choice designed to punish or manipulate. Avoid internalizing the silence as a reflection of your worth. Instead, focus on maintaining your dignity and composure. If possible, address the issue directly, using calm and non-confrontational language. For example, you might say, "I notice you've been quiet lately, and I'd like to understand what's going on. Can we talk about it?" Setting boundaries is equally important. If the silent treatment persists despite your efforts to communicate, consider limiting your engagement. Remind yourself that you cannot control someone else's behavior, but you can control how you respond. Surround yourself with supportive individuals who validate your feelings and provide perspective. Over time, this detachment can weaken the manipulator's hold, as they realize their silence no longer elicits the desired reaction. Ultimately, the silent treatment is a cruel and manipulative tactic that exploits the human need for connection. By understanding its mechanics and refusing to be drawn into its emotional vortex, individuals can protect themselves from its corrosive effects. Communication is the lifeblood of healthy relationships, and silence should never be used as a weapon to punish or control. Shaming, the weaponization of humiliation. Shaming is a psychological manipulation technique that involves attacking someone's character or identity to make them feel inadequate, unworthy, or exposed. Unlike constructive criticism, which focuses on specific behaviors and aims to improve them, shaming targets the core of who a person is, leaving them feeling diminished and powerless. This tactic is particularly damaging because it taps into deep-seated insecurities and societal norms, leveraging shame as a tool to control, punish, or humiliate. Whether in personal relationships, social settings, or public forums, shaming strips away dignity and fosters a toxic environment of fear and self-doubt. Imagine a workplace scenario where a manager publicly criticizes an employee for a minor mistake. Instead of addressing the error privately, the manager announces in front of the entire team, "I can't believe you messed this up again. Are you even paying attention?" The employee, caught off guard, feels a wave of embarrassment wash over them. Their face flushes, their hands tremble, and they struggle to focus for the rest of the day. The manager's words weren't just about the mistake. They were an attack on the employee's competence and worth. This public shaming not only humiliates the employee, but also sets a precedent that mistakes will be met with ridicule rather than constructive feedback. In personal relationships, shaming often takes on a more intimate and insidious form. Consider a partner who says, "You're such a slob. No wonder no one else wanted to date you." This statement isn't just a critique of untidiness. It's an assault on the person's desirability and self-worth. The partner, feeling attacked at their core, might withdraw emotionally or overcompensate by trying to meet impossible standards. Over time, this pattern of shaming erodes their confidence and creates a dynamic where they feel perpetually inadequate, no matter how hard they try. Social media has amplified the reach and impact of shaming, turning it into a public spectacle. Online platforms provide a fertile ground for call-out culture, where individuals are publicly ridiculed for perceived transgressions, whether real or exaggerated. Imagine a teenager posting a photo of themselves wearing an outfit they love, only to be bombarded with comments like, "You look ridiculous," or "Did you even check the mirror before leaving the house?" These remarks aren't just critiques of fashion. They're attacks on the person's appearance, taste, and judgment. The teenager, exposed to a barrage of negativity, might delete the post, retreat from social media, or even develop anxiety about their appearance. The psychological effects of shaming are profound and long-lasting. Victims often internalize the negative messages, believing they are inherently flawed or unworthy. This internalization can lead to chronic self-doubt, low self-esteem, and even mental health issues such as depression or anxiety. In some cases, the fear of being shamed again can paralyze individuals, preventing them from taking risks, expressing themselves, or pursuing their goals. For example, someone who is publicly shamed for speaking up in a meeting might hesitate to contribute ideas in the future, fearing similar ridicule. A striking example of shaming's impact can be seen in family dynamics. Picture a parent who consistently mocks their child for being too sensitive or not good enough. The child, desperate for approval, might suppress their emotions or overachieve to gain validation. However, the underlying message that they are fundamentally flawed lingers, shaping their self-perception and relationships. As adults, they might struggle with feelings of inadequacy or perfectionism, carrying the scars of childhood shaming into their personal and professional lives. Shaming is particularly effective because it exploits societal norms and expectations. In many cultures, certain traits or behaviors are stigmatized, making individuals vulnerable to judgment. For instance, a person who gains weight might face comments like, "You've let yourself go," or "Don't you care about your health?" These remarks tap into societal ideals of beauty and self-discipline, amplifying the shame and making the individual feel as though they failed not just themselves but society's standards. Similarly, someone who expresses vulnerability might be labeled weak or emotional, reinforcing harmful stereotypes about strength and resilience. The line between constructive feedback and shaming is often blurred, but the key difference lies in intent and delivery. Constructive criticism is specific, actionable, and aimed at improvement. It focuses on behaviors rather than identity and is delivered with empathy and respect. Shaming, on the other hand, is vague, personal, and intended to wound. It disregards the individual's feelings and reduces them to their perceived flaws, leaving them feeling exposed and humiliated. Breaking free from the cycle of shaming requires a combination of self-awareness and boundary setting. Recognize when someone is using shame as a weapon and avoid internalizing their words. Remind yourself that their opinions do not define your worth. If possible, address the issue directly, using calm and assertive language. For example, you might say, "I understand you're upset, but your comments about my appearance are hurtful and unnecessary." Setting boundaries is equally important. Surround yourself with people who uplift and support you, and distance yourself from those who consistently use shame as a tool for control. Ultimately, shaming is a destructive tactic that undermines dignity and fosters toxicity. By understanding its impact and learning to resist its pull, individuals can protect themselves from its corrosive effects. True growth and connection are built on respect and empathy, not humiliation and degradation. Scapegoating, the art of unfair blame. Scapegoating is a psychological manipulation technique where one person is unfairly blamed for problems or failures, often to deflect responsibility from the actual perpetrator. This tactic is particularly insidious because it singles out an individual or group, making them the focal point of blame while others escape accountability. The scapegoat becomes a convenient target, absorbing the collective frustrations, anger, or guilt of those around them. This dynamic not only shields the manipulator from scrutiny, but also creates a toxic environment where the scapegoat is marginalized and ostracized. Imagine a workplace scenario where a team fails to meet a critical deadline. Instead of addressing systemic issues like poor planning or lack of resources, the manager singles out one team member, Sarah, for the failure. During a team meeting, the manager says, "If Sarah had managed her tasks better, we wouldn't be in this mess." This statement shifts the focus entirely onto Sarah, ignoring the broader context and contributions of others. Sarah, now labeled as the problem, faces hostility from her colleagues, who may begin to distance themselves to avoid being associated with her. Over time, Sarah's confidence erodes, and she becomes increasingly isolated, all while the real issues remain unaddressed. In family dynamics, scapegoating often manifests as one child being consistently blamed for household conflicts or parental dissatisfaction. Consider a family where the youngest sibling, Alex, is frequently accused of causing arguments or disrupting family harmony. A parent might say, "If Alex didn't act out so much, we wouldn't have these problems." This narrative not only places undue responsibility on Alex, but also diverts attention from deeper family issues, such as marital tension or inconsistent parenting. Alex, burdened by the label of troublemaker, might internalize the blame, leading to feelings of inadequacy and resentment. Scapegoating is particularly prevalent in group settings, where it serves as a mechanism for maintaining cohesion among the majority. By identifying a common enemy, the group unites in opposition, reinforcing their sense of solidarity. For instance, in a school environment, a student who is perceived as different, whether due to their appearance, behavior, or academic performance, might become the target of bullying. Classmates might spread rumors, exclude them socially, or mock them publicly, creating a hostile environment. The scapegoated student, overwhelmed by the relentless negativity, might withdraw from school activities or develop anxiety and depression. The psychological impact of being scapegoated is severe and long-lasting. Victims often experience feelings of alienation, shame, and worthlessness. They may struggle to trust others, fearing that they will be similarly targeted in the future. Over time, this dynamic can lead to a distorted self-image, where the individual believes they are inherently flawed or deserving of blame. In extreme cases, scapegoating can contribute to mental health issues such as depression, anxiety, or even suicidal ideation. A poignant example of scapegoating's societal implications can be seen in historical contexts, where entire groups have been unfairly blamed for societal ills. During periods of economic hardship, minority communities have often been scapegoated for unemployment or crime, leading to discrimination and violence. This pattern of blame not only harms the targeted group, but also distracts from addressing the root causes of the problems, perpetuating cycles of inequality and injustice. Recognizing scapegoating requires a critical examination of the dynamics at play. Look for patterns where one individual or group is consistently singled out for blame, regardless of evidence. Hoovering, the magnetic pull back into toxic dynamics. Hoovering is a psychological manipulation technique where an abuser attempts to suck their victim back into a relationship after a period of abuse, neglect, or separation. Named after the vacuum cleaner brand, this tactic aims to draw the victim back into the manipulator's orbit, often by exploiting their vulnerabilities and emotional attachments. Hoovering is particularly insidious because it preys on hope, nostalgia, and the victim's desire for resolution, making it difficult to resist. This technique thrives on creating a false sense of reconciliation while maintaining the underlying dynamics of control and manipulation. Imagine a scenario where Sarah ends a toxic relationship with her partner, Mark, after enduring months of emotional abuse. She finally gathers the strength to leave, seeking peace and independence. However, just as she begins to rebuild her life, Mark reappears with a flood of affectionate messages and promises of change. He says things like, "I've been thinking about you nonstop. I can't live without you." Or, "I've realized my mistakes, and I'm ready to be the person you deserve." These words are accompanied by grand gestures, such as sending flowers, calling repeatedly, or even showing up unannounced. Sarah, still emotionally connected to Mark and hopeful for a better future, feels torn between her newfound independence and the allure of his promises. What makes hoovering so effective is its ability to tap into the victim's deepest desires and fears. The manipulator often presents themselves as remorseful and committed to change, appealing to the victim's empathy and love. For instance, Mark might say, "You're the only one who truly understands me. Without you, I'm lost." This statement not only flatters Sarah, but also frames her as indispensable to Mark's well-being, reinforcing her sense of responsibility for his happiness. Over time, Sarah might begin to question her decision to leave, wondering if she was too harsh or if Mark genuinely deserves another chance. Hoovering isn't limited to romantic relationships. It can occur in friendships, familial bonds, and even professional settings. Consider a friendship where Lisa distances herself from her manipulative friend, Rachel, after realizing how draining the relationship has become. Rachel, unwilling to lose her grip on Lisa, suddenly becomes overly attentive. She might text Lisa daily, saying, "I miss you so much. Things aren't the same without you," or "I've been working on myself. Can we talk?" These messages are designed to tug at Lisa's heartstrings, making her feel guilty for abandoning the friendship. Despite her initial resolve, Lisa might find herself drawn back into Rachel's orbit, only to discover that nothing has truly changed. The danger of hoovering lies in its cyclical nature. Once the victim is drawn back into the relationship, the manipulator often reverts to their abusive behaviors, restarting the cycle of toxicity. For example, Mark might initially seem loving and attentive after Sarah returns, but within weeks, he resumes his controlling tendencies, criticizing her choices or isolating her from friends. This pattern creates a trauma bond, where the victim becomes trapped in a push-and-pull dynamic, oscillating between hope and despair. Each hoovering attempt reinforces the manipulator's control, leaving the victim increasingly dependent on their validation. A poignant example of hoovering can be seen in family dynamics involving estranged parents and children. Imagine a father who has neglected his daughter, Emma, for years, only to reach out after she moves away for college. He might call her, saying, "I've been thinking about all the times we spent together. I want to make things right." Emma, longing for a meaningful connection with her father, might agree to meet him, hoping for reconciliation. However, during their meeting, he subtly guilt-trips her for moving away, saying, I guess you've outgrown me." This comment undermines Emma's confidence and reinforces her sense of obligation to mend the relationship, even though her father hasn't truly acknowledged his past neglect. The psychological toll of hoovering can be devastating. Victims often experience confusion, self-doubt, and anxiety as they navigate the manipulator's contradictory behaviors. They may internalize the belief that they are responsible for the manipulator's happiness or that they must endure abuse to maintain the relationship. Over time, this dynamic erodes their self-esteem and autonomy, leaving them vulnerable to further manipulation. Breaking free from hoovering requires a combination of self-awareness and boundary setting. Recognize the patterns of hoovering, grand gestures, promises of change, and emotional appeals, and resist the urge to engage. Remind yourself that actions speak louder than words, and true change requires consistent effort over time. If the manipulator refuses to acknowledge their past behavior or take accountability, their promises are likely empty. Surround yourself with supportive individuals who validate your experiences and encourage you to prioritize your well-being. Setting boundaries is crucial for protecting yourself from hoovering attempts. Communicate your limits clearly and assertively, even if it feels uncomfortable. For example, you might say, "I need space to focus on myself right now. Please respect my decision." Avoid engaging in prolonged conversations or debates, as the manipulator may use these interactions to wear you down. If necessary, block their calls, texts, or social media accounts to create distance and reinforce your boundaries. Ultimately, hoovering is a calculated tactic designed to exploit your emotions and pull you back into a toxic dynamic. By understanding its mechanics and learning to resist its pull, you can reclaim your autonomy and foster healthier, more balanced relationships. Remember, no one deserves to be manipulated or controlled, and true healing begins with setting boundaries and prioritizing your own well-being. Projecting, the mirror of denial. Projection is a psychological manipulation technique where an individual attributes their own unacceptable thoughts, feelings, or behaviors onto someone else. This defense mechanism allows the manipulator to avoid confronting their flaws by shifting the focus onto others, effectively deflecting responsibility and creating confusion. Projection is particularly insidious because it distorts reality, forcing the victim to question their perceptions and actions while shielding the manipulator from accountability. Imagine a workplace scenario where a manager, Alex, consistently misses deadlines and blames their team for the delays. During a meeting, Alex accuses their employee, Jamie, of being disorganized and unreliable, saying, "If you were more on top of things, we wouldn't keep falling behind." In reality, Alex is the one struggling with time management and procrastination, but instead of addressing their shortcomings, they project these traits onto Jamie. This projection not only diverts attention from Alex's failures, but also undermines Jamie's confidence and performance, as they begin to internalize the unfair criticism. In personal relationships, projection often manifests as accusations that reflect the manipulator's own insecurities or behaviors. Consider a partner, Sam, who accuses their significant other, Riley, of being emotionally distant and unfaithful. Sam might say, "I know you're hiding something from me. You're always so secretive." In truth, Sam is the one engaging in secretive behavior, perhaps hiding their own infidelity or emotional struggles. By projecting these traits onto Riley, Sam avoids confronting their guilt while simultaneously destabilizing Riley's trust in themselves and the relationship. Projection is particularly effective because it exploits the victim's empathy and self-doubt. When someone accuses you of something you don't recognize in yourself, it's natural to feel confused and defensive. Over time, repeated projections can lead to gaslighting-like effects, where the victim begins to doubt their own perceptions and experiences. For example, a manipulative friend might accuse you of being selfish or inconsiderate, even though their own actions contradict these claims. As the accusations pile up, you might start questioning your intentions and behavior, wondering if you're truly the problem. A striking example of projection can be seen in familial dynamics, particularly between siblings. Imagine two brothers, Ethan and Noah, who have a strained relationship. Ethan frequently accuses Noah of being jealous and resentful, saying, "You're always trying to compete with me and make me look bad." In reality, Ethan is the one harboring jealousy and resentment toward Noah's achievements, but instead of acknowledging these feelings, he projects them onto his brother. This dynamic creates tension and misunderstanding, as Noah struggles to defend himself against baseless accusations while Ethan remains oblivious to his role in the conflict. The psychological impact of projection can be profound. Victims often experience feelings of inadequacy, frustration, and confusion as they grapple with the manipulator's distorted narrative. They may find themselves constantly defending their actions or apologizing for perceived wrongs, even when they haven't done anything wrong. Over time, this dynamic erodes their self-esteem and fosters a sense of helplessness as they struggle to reconcile the manipulator's accusations with their own reality. Recognizing projection requires a critical examination of the dynamics at play. Look for patterns where the manipulator accuses others of behaviors or traits that closely mirror their own. Ask yourself, is the accusation consistent with the evidence? Does the manipulator exhibit similar behaviors that contradict their claims? Once identified, it's important to resist internalizing the projections and maintain your sense of self-worth. Remind yourself that the manipulator's accusations are a reflection of their own issues, not your reality. Setting boundaries is essential for protecting yourself from projection. Communicate your perspective calmly and assertively, even if the manipulator refuses to acknowledge their behavior. For example, you might say, "I understand you're upset, but I don't agree with your assessment of the situation." Avoid engaging in arguments or debates, as the manipulator may use these interactions to reinforce their narrative. Instead, focus on maintaining your clarity and confidence. Ultimately, projection is a defense mechanism rooted in denial and avoidance. By understanding its mechanics and learning to resist its pull, you can protect yourself from its corrosive effects. True growth and connection require honesty and accountability, not the distortion of reality through blame and deflection. Negative reinforcement, manipulative, the hidden reward system. Negative reinforcement, in its manipulative form, is a psychological tactic where an aversive stimulus is removed only when the desired behavior is performed. Unlike positive reinforcement, which involves rewarding good behavior, negative reinforcement focuses on eliminating discomfort or punishment to encourage compliance. This technique is particularly insidious because it operates under the guise of relief, making the victim believe that their actions are voluntary when, in reality, they're being subtly coerced. Consider a scenario where a parent uses negative reinforcement to control their child's behavior. Every time the child cleans their room, the parent stops nagging them about it. The nagging serves as the aversive stimulus, and its removal acts as the reward. While this might seem like a harmless parenting strategy, it can become manipulative when used excessively or inappropriately. For instance, if the parent consistently nags the child about every minor task, the child may begin to associate compliance with relief rather than intrinsic motivation. Over time, this dynamic can erode the child's sense of autonomy and self-worth, teaching them to act out of fear of discomfort rather than genuine desire. In romantic relationships, negative reinforcement often takes on a more subtle and damaging form. Imagine a partner who frequently criticizes their significant other for small mistakes, such as forgetting to send a text or being late to dinner. However, when the criticized partner apologizes or makes amends, the criticism stops. This pattern creates a cycle where the victim learns to avoid conflict by preemptively complying with the manipulator's demands. For example, they might start double-checking every action to ensure it meets their partner's expectations, fearing the return of criticism if they don't. This dynamic not only stifles the victim's independence, but also reinforces the manipulator's control. Workplace environments are another fertile ground for manipulative negative reinforcement. Picture a manager who frequently micromanages their employees, pointing out errors or inefficiencies in their work. When an employee corrects the issue or goes above and beyond to meet the manager's standards, the micromanagement temporarily ceases. This removal of pressure serves as the reward, encouraging the employee to continue bending to the manager's will. Over time, the employee may feel trapped in a cycle of overwork and self-doubt, as they equate compliance with relief from scrutiny. The psychological effects of manipulative negative reinforcement can be significant. Victims often experience chronic stress, anxiety, and a pervasive sense of inadequacy. They may begin to internalize the belief that their worth is contingent upon avoiding discomfort or punishment, leading to a distorted sense of self-worth. Over time, this dynamic can result in burnout, resentment, and a reluctance to assert boundaries in future relationships. A poignant example of negative reinforcement's impact can be seen in friendships. Imagine a friend who frequently complains about feeling unsupported or misunderstood. When their companion offers sympathy or assistance, the complaints temporarily cease, providing a sense of relief. However, the cycle repeats itself whenever the friend feels slighted or dissatisfied, creating a dynamic where the companion feels obligated to constantly placate them. This pattern not only strains the friendship, but also leaves the companion feeling drained and powerless to break the cycle. Recognizing manipulative negative reinforcement requires a keen awareness of its patterns. Look for situations where relief from discomfort or criticism is contingent upon specific behaviors. Does the manipulator consistently use nagging, criticism, or micromanagement to enforce compliance? Do they remove the aversive stimulus only when their demands are met? Once identified, it's important to resist the urge to comply solely for relief. Instead, focus on addressing the root cause of the behavior and setting clear boundaries. Setting boundaries is crucial for breaking free from manipulative negative reinforcement. Communicate your limits assertively, even if it feels uncomfortable. For example, you might say, "I understand you're upset, but constant criticism isn't productive. Let's find a better way to address these issues." Surround yourself with supportive individuals who validate your experiences and encourage you to prioritize your well-being. Ultimately, manipulative negative reinforcement is a covert form of control that exploits the human desire for relief. By understanding its mechanics and learning to resist its pull, individuals can reclaim their autonomy and foster healthier, more balanced relationships. True growth and connection require mutual respect and empowerment, not coercion through discomfort and relief. Intermittent reinforcement, the invisible chain. Imagine playing a slot machine. You pull the lever repeatedly, and most times, nothing happens. But occasionally, just often enough to keep you engaged, you win a small prize. Despite the many losses, those unpredictable wins create a powerful psychological hook that keeps you coming back. This is intermittent reinforcement at work, and it's one of the most effective psychological manipulation techniques used in human relationships. Intermittent reinforcement occurs when rewards or positive responses are given inconsistently and unpredictably. The power lies in the unpredictability. If someone never knows when a reward will come, they'll keep trying in hopes of eventually receiving it. Unlike consistent rewards, which people eventually take for granted, intermittent reinforcement creates a persistent hope that keeps people engaged in harmful situations far longer than they otherwise would. Consider Sarah and David's relationship. When they first met, David showered Sarah with affection, compliments, and thoughtful gestures. She felt cherished and special. But after a few months, David's behavior changed dramatically. He became cold, distant, and sometimes cruel, ignoring her texts, canceling plans at the last minute, or making cutting remarks about her appearance. Just when Sarah was ready to end the relationship, David would suddenly transform back into the loving partner she first knew, bringing flowers, planning elaborate dates, and telling her how much she meant to him. This created a powerful psychological trap. Sarah never knew which version of David she would encounter on any given day. The unpredictability kept her in a constant state of emotional hypervigilance, analyzing her own behavior to figure out what triggered his warmth or coldness. Rather than recognizing his inconsistency as manipulation, she became convinced that if she could just say or do the right things, she could maintain his affection permanently. "I know he loves me," Sarah told her concerned friend. "You just don't see how wonderful he can be. Last week, he surprised me with tickets to my favorite band. He remembered I mentioned them months ago." What Sarah didn't acknowledge was that this loving gesture came after weeks of painful silent treatment and emotional distance. This pattern works because humans are natural pattern seekers. We desperately want to believe there's a reason behind others' behavior, especially when that behavior hurts us. When someone we care about treats us, while only occasionally and unpredictably, we become fixated on recreating the conditions that led to the positive treatment rather than recognizing the relationship as fundamentally unhealthy. Intermittent reinforcement doesn't just appear in romantic relationships. Parents can employ this manipulation technique too, alternating between praise and criticism in ways that leave children perpetually insecure and anxious to please. A mother who reacts with warmth to her daughter's accomplishments one day but responds with indifference or criticism the next creates a child who will work increasingly hard for that elusive approval. In workplace settings, a boss might use intermittent reinforcement by occasionally praising employees lavishly while maintaining an overall atmosphere of criticism and impossible standards. Employees subjected to this treatment often work longer hours and tolerate poor conditions, hoping to recapture those rare moments of recognition. What makes intermittent reinforcement particularly dangerous is that it creates what psychologists call a trauma bond, a deep attachment formed through cycles of abuse and reward. These bonds can be stronger than those formed in consistently positive relationships precisely because of their intensity and unpredictability. The relief that comes when the abuse temporarily stops feels so profound that it's mistaken for love or connection. Marcus experienced this in his friendship with Alex. Most of the time, Alex would belittle Marcus's ideas, exclude him from social gatherings, or share his secrets with others. But occasionally, Alex would single Marcus out for special attention, confiding in him, complimenting him publicly, or including him in exclusive activities. Those precious moments of inclusion kept Marcus committed to a friendship that was, in reality, deeply harmful to his self-esteem. "Alex is my best friend," Marcus would insist. Sure, he can be tough sometimes, but he's the only one who really gets me. In truth, Alex had methodically undermined Marcus's other friendships, ensuring that those rare moments of positive attention felt like lifelines rather than the manipulative tools they actually were. Breaking free from intermittent reinforcement requires recognizing the pattern. The first step is acknowledging that inconsistency itself is the problem, not something you're doing wrong to trigger the negative responses. In healthy relationships, affection, respect, and kindness are constants, not rewards to be earned through perfect behavior or enduring abuse. Recovery also involves understanding the withdrawal effect. When you remove yourself from a relationship built on intermittent reinforcement, you may experience intense cravings for those unpredictable rewards, similar to addiction withdrawal. This is normal and temporary, but it can make it difficult to maintain no contact with manipulative individuals. To protect yourself, look for consistency in relationships. Someone who is genuinely kind will show kindness regularly, not just when it serves them. They won't use affection as a tool to control your behavior or punish perceived infractions. Real love and friendship feel stable and secure, not like an emotional roller coaster. Ultimately, intermittent reinforcement reveals a fundamental truth about human psychology. Uncertainty can be more compelling than consistency. This is why gambling is addictive, why unreliable romantic partners sometimes seem more exciting, and why manipulators can maintain control through unpredictable behavior. By understanding this mechanism, we can recognize when it's being used against us and choose relationships that offer the steady support and consistent care we all deserve. Remember Sarah, who eventually recognized the pattern in her relationship with David? I realized I was chasing moments that represented maybe 5% of our time together, she said. I was ignoring the other 95% that made me miserable because those rare good times felt so wonderful by comparison. With this awareness, she was able to break free and eventually find a partner whose kindness and respect were daily givens, not occasional prizes in an emotional lottery. Isolation, the invisible prison. When we think of prisons, we imagine concrete walls and metal bars. But there exists a more insidious type of confinement, one built not of physical materials, but of manipulative tactics designed to cut someone off from their support network. This is isolation, a powerful psychological technique that manipulators use to gain complete control over their victims. Isolation rarely happens overnight. Instead, it creeps in gradually, often disguised as care or concern. Your mother seems to stress you out whenever you talk to her, a manipulative partner might observe. Maybe you should take a break from calling her so often. Or, I don't think your friends really understand our relationship. They're putting ideas in your head. These seemingly innocent suggestions plant the first seeds of separation between the victim and their support system. Consider Emma's story. When she first met Ryan, he was charming and attentive. He'd surprise her at work with lunch, text her constantly, and plan romantic weekends together. Friends noticed she was around less, but they assumed it was just the honeymoon phase of a new relationship. What they didn't see was how Ryan subtly criticized Emma's friends whenever she mentioned them. "Sarah sounds really judgmental," he'd say after Emma recounted a conversation. "And wasn't Mark the one who got too drunk at that party? I'm not sure these people are good influences." Ryan's comments seemed protective rather than controlling, and Emma found herself defending her friends less and canceling plans more. When her sister raised concerns about how little they saw each other, Ryan suggested her family was jealous of their happiness. "They've always tried to control you," he told Emma, "but I love you for who you really are." The implicit message became clear. Her family didn't truly accept her, but Ryan did. This is how isolation operates, by creating an us versus them mentality where the manipulator positions themselves as the only person who truly understands, loves, or accepts the victim. As the victim's world grows smaller, their dependence on the manipulator grows stronger. Every lost connection means one fewer perspective challenging the manipulator's version of reality, one fewer refuge when problems arise. The isolation can extend beyond relationships to practical barriers as well. A manipulator might encourage their victim to move far from family, change jobs to work at the same company, or give up hobbies that provided social connections. They might insist on driving the victim everywhere, monitoring phone calls, or checking social media accounts, all under the guise of closeness or protection. Michael experienced this when his boyfriend insisted they move to a new city for better opportunities. Once there, Michael knew no one, worked remotely, and relied on his partner for transportation. When conflict arose, Michael had nowhere to go, no one to provide perspective, and no independent means to leave, exactly as his partner had planned. I didn't realize how isolated I'd become until my phone broke one day, Michael later shared. I literally couldn't contact anyone except by using his phone, with him watching. That's when it hit me how completely dependent I'd become. Isolation is particularly effective when paired with intermittent reinforcement. The manipulator becomes not only the primary source of emotional connection, but the sole provider of validation and approval. When everyone else has been pushed away, the occasional kindness from an abuser can feel like a lifeline rather than the manipulation it truly is. Technology has created new avenues for isolation. A controlling person might monitor their victim's online activity, force them to share passwords, demand video calls to verify whereabouts, or create conflict when the victim communicates with others via social media or messaging apps. This digital leash extends the manipulator's control beyond physical spaces into virtual ones. Isolation also thrives on shame. Manipulators often create situations that embarrass their victims in front of others, then use that shame to justify further isolation. See how they looked at you? They don't respect you like I do. Each uncomfortable social interaction becomes evidence that the outside world is judgmental and unsafe compared to the relationship with the manipulator. What makes isolation particularly devastating is how it erodes the victim's sense of normalcy. Without external perspectives, it becomes increasingly difficult to recognize unhealthy patterns. Friends might have pointed out that constantly checking in with a partner isn't normal. Parents might have noted that being criticized daily isn't loving behavior. A therapist might have identified patterns of emotional abuse. But isolated victims lack these reality checks, leaving them vulnerable to increasingly extreme manipulation. The damage caused by isolation persists even after leaving an abusive situation. Having been disconnected from support networks, survivors often struggle to rebuild relationships. They may feel shame about how they've neglected these connections or feared judgment for staying in an unhealthy situation. Trust, both in others and in one's own judgment, can take years to rebuild. Linda, who escaped an isolating marriage after 5 years, described this aftermath. The hardest part was calling old friends, admitting what had happened, and asking if they were still willing to be in my life. Some relationships couldn't be salvaged, and that was another loss to grieve. But others welcomed me back with such compassion that it helped me trust again. Protection against isolation begins with maintaining multiple connections in different areas of life: friends, family, colleagues, community groups. Healthy relationships encourage other connections rather than demanding exclusivity. Red flags include a new partner who criticizes your existing relationships, creates drama around your social plans, demands constant communication when you're apart, or makes you feel guilty for spending time with others. If you recognize isolation happening to someone you care about, maintain contact even if they seem unresponsive or distant. Simple messages like, "I'm here whenever you want to talk," or "I miss you and am thinking of you," can provide crucial lifelines. Avoid criticizing the isolating partner directly, as this may push the victim further away, but do express concern about changes you've noticed. For those who have been isolated, recovery involves deliberately rebuilding a diverse support network. This might include reconnecting with old friends, finding community groups based on interests, working with a therapist, or joining survivor support groups. Each new connection helps restore perspective and rebuild the social muscles that atrophy during isolation. Ultimately, isolation reveals a fundamental truth about human resilience. We are stronger together. Our connections to others provide not just emotional support, but essential reality testing that helps us recognize manipulation. By understanding how isolation works as a control tactic, we can better protect ourselves and others from those who would use our fundamental need for connection as a weapon against us. Financial abuse. Chains made of money. Money might not buy happiness, but it certainly buys freedom, the ability to make choices, to leave unhealthy situations, to build the life you want. This is precisely why financial abuse is such a powerful tool of control. By systematically limiting someone's access to financial resources, an abuser creates invisible chains that can be stronger than physical restraints. Financial abuse rarely announces itself clearly. It often begins under the guise of helpfulness or financial wisdom. Let me handle the complicated stuff an abuser might offer. You've never been good with numbers anyway. Or perhaps, we should combine our accounts to save on fees. It just makes sense. These seemingly practical suggestions mask a deeper agenda, gaining complete control over the household finances and, by extension, their partner's independence. Consider Diane's experience. When she married James, he suggested managing their finances since he worked in banking. It seemed logical. He had expertise she didn't. Gradually, James took control of all accounts, insisting Diane run even small purchases by him. He questioned her spending habits, calling them irresponsible despite her modest needs. Eventually, Diane had to ask permission to buy basics like shampoo or lunch with colleagues. I had a master's degree and a good job, but I felt like a child getting an allowance, Diane later explained. I didn't realize it was abuse because there were no bruises, just crushing financial dependence. Financial abuse manifests in countless ways beyond controlling daily expenses. An abuser might prevent their partner from working, sabotaging job interviews, or creating conflicts that cause them to miss work. They might force their partner to work in a family business without fair compensation, creating a situation where their labor benefits only the abuser. They might insist the partner's name stays off property deeds, car titles, or rental agreements, ensuring they have no legal claim to shared assets. Credit destruction is another common tactic. An abuser might take out credit cards or loans in their partner's name, then deliberately miss payments, destroying the victim's credit score and making it nearly impossible for them to rent an apartment or secure loans independently. Some abusers even file fraudulent tax returns using their partner's information, creating tax liabilities that follow the victim for years. Financial abuse doesn't always involve direct control. Sometimes it operates through financial exploitation, pressuring someone to cover all household expenses while the abuser saves their own money, forcing the victim to take on debt for the abuser's benefit, or coercing them into risky financial schemes. The pattern remains consistent. One person gains while the other loses financial security. The psychological impact of financial abuse runs deep. Victims often report profound shame about their financial situation, blaming themselves rather than recognizing the systematic manipulation at play. This shame can prevent them from seeking help, especially if they once had financial independence. The constant stress of financial insecurity also creates anxiety, depression, and physical health problems, further reducing the victim's capacity to break free. Jason experienced this spiral after his partner gained control of his inheritance, promising to invest it wisely. Instead, she spent the money while convincing Jason they were making sound investments together. By the time he realized what had happened, the inheritance was gone, and Jason felt too humiliated to tell anyone. "I felt like the stupidest person alive," he admitted. "How could I let this happen? Who will believe me?" What makes financial abuse particularly insidious is how it intersects with practical barriers to leaving abusive relationships. Without access to money, how does one rent an apartment, hire a lawyer, or even buy bus tickets to a safer location? Without a credit history, how does one secure utilities or a cell phone? These practical challenges can keep victims trapped long after they've recognized the abuse. Financial abuse also exploits societal inequalities. It disproportionately affects women, especially those who've left careers to raise children or care for family members. It targets immigrants who may not understand local financial systems or have established credit. It preys on the elderly, particularly those with cognitive decline who may not track their finances closely. These vulnerabilities aren't accidents. They're leverage points that financial abusers deliberately exploit. Prevention starts with financial literacy and transparency. In healthy relationships, both parties understand the household finances, have access to accounts, and participate in major financial decisions. Red flags include a partner who refuses to discuss money, becomes angry when asked about finances, insists on maintaining financial inequality, or uses money to punish or reward behavior. For those already experiencing financial abuse, recovery begins with small steps toward independence. This might mean secretly saving small amounts from grocery money, keeping important documents like birth certificates and social security cards in a safe place, or building skills that could lead to employment. Many domestic violence organizations offer financial literacy programs specifically designed for abuse survivors, recognizing that economic independence is crucial for lasting freedom. Communities play a vital role in supporting survivors of financial abuse. Friends and family can offer practical help, a place to stay, professional clothes for job interviews, childcare during work hours. That makes independence possible. Employers can implement policies that support survivors, such as advance pay options or flexible schedules during the transition period. Financial institutions can create programs to help rebuild credit and establish financial independence. Miguel, who left a financially abusive relationship after 10 years, credits his recovery to a community credit union program designed for abuse survivors. They helped me open my first independent account and gave me a secured credit card to start rebuilding my credit, he said. The financial counselor never judged me or made me feel stupid for what I'd experienced. That respect meant everything. The scars of financial abuse can last years beyond the relationship itself. Survivors often struggle with financial anxiety, difficulty trusting financial institutions, and patterns of either excessive frugality or impulsive spending as reactions to their previous restrictions. Recovery involves not just rebuilding financial resources, but healing the psychological relationship with money itself. Ultimately, financial abuse reveals money's dual nature in our society. It represents both practical resources and deeply personal values around security, success, and self-worth. By weaponizing money, abusers attack not just their victims' bank accounts, but their sense of competence, autonomy, and future possibilities. Recognizing financial abuse as the serious form of control it is, rather than dismissing it as just money problems, is essential for both prevention and recovery. True security comes not just from having resources, but from having the knowledge, confidence, and support to manage those resources independently. Threats and intimidation, the weapons of fear. Fear is one of humanity's most powerful motivators. It bypasses our rational thinking, triggering instant compliance to avoid perceived danger. This is why threats and intimidation form such effective tools of manipulation. They exploit our natural survival instincts, creating a state where victims comply not out of choice, but out of terror of the consequences. Threats and intimidation exist on a spectrum, from subtle to explicit. At the more subtle end, a manipulator might use threatening body language, looming over someone, blocking doorways, or punching walls, without explicitly stating any threat. They might employ a certain tone of voice that signals danger based on past experiences. These nonverbal threats allow manipulators to later claim innocence. I never threatened you. I just asked a question. Consider Mark's experience with his supervisor, Alicia. Whenever he made a minor mistake, Alicia would call him into her office, close the door, and speak in a quiet, controlled voice while mentioning colleagues who had been fired. I'd never directly threaten your job, Mark, she would say. I'm just letting you know what happened to others who couldn't meet our standards. Though no explicit threat was made, Mark understood the message. Comply or lose your livelihood. More explicit threats directly state the negative consequences that will follow disobedience. These might include threats of physical harm, public humiliation, financial punishment, damage to reputation, harm to loved ones, including pets, or threats to take away something valued, like children, housing, or immigration status. The common thread is that the threat targets something the victim deeply fears losing or experiencing. What makes threats particularly effective is that they require no actual action from the manipulator beyond making the threat itself. Once a person has established their willingness to follow through on threats, even just once, the mere suggestion of similar consequences can control behavior indefinitely. The victim's imagination often creates more terror than reality, as they envision worst-case scenarios and modify their behavior to avoid them. Elena experienced this after her partner destroyed her artwork during an argument. He never touched her physically, but the message was clear. If he could destroy something she loved, he could hurt her too. After that, I could tell when he was angry by how he looked at my new paintings, Elena recalled. I'd immediately start apologizing for whatever I thought I'd done wrong, even if I wasn't sure what it was. The fear was overwhelming. Intimidation works hand in hand with threats as a control tactic. While threats promise future harm, intimidation creates immediate fear through displays of potential danger. An intimidating person might showcase weapons, demonstrate physical strength, drive recklessly with the victim in the car, or harm pets as warnings. The message is clear. See what I'm capable of? You should be afraid. Technology has created new avenues for threats and intimidation. Abusers might send constant threatening messages, track victims through GPS or spyware, or threaten to share private photos or information online. These digital threats can feel inescapable, following victims everywhere through their devices. Even seemingly innocuous messages can carry threatening undertones when they demonstrate the abuser's ability to monitor the victim's activities or whereabouts. The psychological impact of living under constant threat is profound. The body remains in a state of hypervigilance, with stress hormones continuously flooding the system. This leads to anxiety, depression, sleep disturbances, digestive problems, and weakened immune function. Cognitive abilities suffer too, as the brain's resources remain focused on survival rather than higher-level thinking. This makes it increasingly difficult for victims to plan escapes or even recognize the abnormality of their situation. Children who witness or experience threats and intimidation suffer particular harm. They learn that power comes through fear rather than respect, that problems are solved through threats rather than communication. Many carry these lessons into their own relationships, either becoming manipulators themselves or remaining vulnerable to similar abuse patterns. This intergenerational cycle perpetuates the damage far beyond the original relationship. What makes threats and intimidation particularly insidious is how they silence victims. The fear of what might happen if they speak out often outweighs the hope of finding help. This is especially true when the threats explicitly target potential escape routes. If you tell anyone, I'll make sure no one believes you, or if you leave, I'll find you wherever you go. These threats specifically target the victim's ability to seek safety. Jamal faced this impossible choice when his partner threatened to out him to his religious family if he ended their relationship. He knew my parents might disown me, Jamal explained. So I stayed for years, believing I had to choose between an abusive relationship and losing my entire family. The isolation made the threats even more powerful. Legal responses to threats have improved but remain inconsistent. While explicit threats of violence may lead to restraining orders or criminal charges, more subtle intimidation often falls below the threshold for legal intervention. This creates a dangerous gap where victims recognize the threat but cannot access protection until actual harm occurs. Recovery from chronic threats and intimidation takes time. The brain and body have adapted to constant danger, and they don't immediately recognize safety even when it's achieved. Survivors often experience anxiety, hypervigilance, and trauma responses long after reaching physical safety. Trauma-informed therapy can help reset these nervous system patterns and develop new coping mechanisms. For those supporting survivors, understanding this lingering fear is crucial. What might seem like paranoia, checking locks repeatedly, startling at loud noises, reluctance to trust, represents normal responses to abnormal experiences of threat. Recovery involves not eliminating these responses immediately, but gradually helping the nervous system recognize present safety. Prevention involves recognizing early warning signs of threatening behavior in relationships. These include displays of excessive anger over minor issues, comfort with using fear to control others, even in jokes, histories of threatening previous partners, and beliefs that fear equals respect. In healthy relationships, disagreements might become heated, but never involve implicit or explicit threats of harm. Communities can help break the power of threats by creating safe reporting mechanisms and taking threats seriously before they escalate to violence. This includes workplace policies that address threatening behavior, school programs that teach conflict resolution without intimidation, and legal systems that recognize the harm of threats themselves, not just their potential to lead to physical violence. Ultimately, threats and intimidation reveal important truths about human psychology and relationships. We are hardwired to avoid danger, making fear a powerful motivator. But healthy relationships are built on mutual respect and safety, not fear and compliance. By recognizing threatening behavior as the serious manipulation it is, rather than dismissing it as just words or a bad temper, we can better protect ourselves and others from those who would use our natural fear response as a weapon against us. Sleep deprivation, the quiet destroyer of judgment. Sleep is not a luxury, but a biological necessity, as fundamental to human functioning as food and water. When we sleep, our brains process emotions, consolidate memories, clear toxins, and prepare for the next day's cognitive challenges. This is precisely why sleep deprivation is such an effective tool of manipulation. It targets the very foundation of our ability to think clearly, make decisions, and resist control. Sleep deprivation as a manipulation tactic has been recognized in contexts ranging from military interrogation to cult indoctrination, but it also appears in personal relationships, where it's often overlooked as simply relationship stress rather than deliberate control. Unlike more obvious forms of abuse, sleep disruption can seem coincidental or even be explained away as care or concern. Consider Lisa's experience with her partner, Chris. Their arguments always seemed to start late at night, when Lisa was already exhausted from her nursing shifts. If she tried to pause the discussion to sleep, Chris would accuse her of not caring about their relationship. If this mattered to you, you'd stay up and work through it, he'd say. These important talks would stretch until 3 or 4 a.m., leaving Lisa functioning on minimal sleep during her high-responsibility job. By the weekend, she was too exhausted to see friends or family, effectively isolating her. I didn't realize it was intentional until a coworker pointed out the pattern, Lisa later explained. All our big fights happen at night, and somehow the reconciliation always took hours, keeping me up even later. I was so sleep-deprived that I started doubting my own perceptions of our problems. Sleep deprivation tactics can be surprisingly varied and creative. A manipulator might create noises that prevent sleep, such as playing music, having loud phone conversations, or accidentally waking their target repeatedly. They might invent emergencies that require immediate attention in the middle of the night. Some deliberately schedule activities very early after late nights, creating a chronic sleep deficit. Parents might be kept up with claims of childcare needs that the manipulative partner could handle but chooses not to. Technology offers new avenues for sleep disruption. A controlling person might send messages throughout the night, expecting immediate responses. They might track their partner's online status, creating conflict if they go offline to sleep. Some even use smart home features to remotely control lights or sounds in the victim's environment, creating subtle disruptions that seem like technical glitches rather than deliberate manipulation. The cognitive effects of sleep deprivation are profound and well documented scientifically. Without adequate sleep, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for rational thinking and decision-making, becomes impaired. Emotional reactivity increases while the ability to regulate those emotions decreases. Memory suffers, making it difficult to recall details or notice inconsistencies in a manipulator's statements. Attention fragments, reducing the ability to focus on complex problems or recognize manipulation patterns. Perhaps most dangerously, sleep deprivation impairs risk assessment. Studies show sleep-deprived individuals take greater risks while simultaneously underestimating the potential negative consequences. This creates a perfect storm for manipulation victims, who become less able to evaluate harmful situations accurately or plan effective escapes. James experienced this cognitive erosion during his marriage to Diane, who would wake him multiple times each night to check that he hadn't been texting other women. After months of broken sleep, I couldn't trust my own thoughts, James shared. She would tell me things I'd supposedly said or done, and even when it didn't sound right, I couldn't be sure of my own memories. I was too exhausted to fight back mentally. Physical health deteriorates under chronic sleep deprivation as well. The immune system weakens, making illness more common. Blood pressure rises, increasing heart attack and stroke risk. Weight regulation hormones become imbalanced, often leading to weight gain despite no changes in diet. These physical effects create additional stressors that further reduce resistance to manipulation. What makes sleep deprivation particularly effective as a control tactic is that its effects compound over time while becoming increasingly invisible to the victim. Someone experiencing chronic sleep loss often can't recognize how impaired they've become, similar to how intoxicated people often believe they're functioning normally. This creates a dangerous situation where victims can't accurately assess either their own cognitive state or the manipulation they're experiencing. The psychological impact extends beyond cognitive function. Chronic sleep deprivation is strongly linked to anxiety and depression, creating a vicious cycle where poor mental health further disrupts sleep. Some victims develop lasting insomnia as their bodies become conditioned to associate bedtime with stress and conflict. Others experience nightmares and hypervigilance that persist even after reaching safety, as the body remains primed for nighttime danger. Children are particularly vulnerable to the effects of manipulative sleep deprivation. Their developing brains require more sleep than adults, and disruptions can affect everything from academic performance to emotional regulation to physical growth. A manipulative parent might deliberately keep children up late, then blame the other parent for the resulting behavioral problems, creating both control and alienation simultaneously. Recovery from chronic sleep deprivation begins with establishing sleep safety, an environment where uninterrupted rest becomes possible. Goalposts, profound self-doubt coupled with perpetual inadequacy. Victims question not only their abilities, but their understanding of reality itself. Did the manipulator actually promise what I remember? Was I unclear about the expectations? Am I misremembering our agreement? This uncertainty erodes confidence and creates dependency on the manipulator's ever-changing assessments. Moving the goalposts appears in various relationships and contexts. In romantic relationships, it might manifest as conditional love that remains perpetually out of reach. I'll be ready for commitment when you're more financially stable shifts to we need more time together shifts to I need to see you handle stress better. In parent-child relationships, it might appear as approval that's always just beyond grasp. The A that should have been an A+, the sports achievement that would be impressive if the competition had been stronger. Workplace environments provide particularly fertile ground for this manipulation, with vague promotion criteria, subjective performance evaluations, and power imbalances that make questioning difficult. Religious or community organizations might employ similar tactics, with acceptance or inclusion always requiring one more demonstration of commitment or adherence to ever-tightening standards. What makes moving the goalposts particularly effective is its apparent reasonableness. Each individual shifted standard often seems plausible or even beneficial when viewed in isolation. Of course, additional education might improve job performance. Of course, couples' communication could always improve before major commitments. These surface-level justifications mask the underlying pattern of perpetually denied success or acceptance. The technique works most effectively when combined with intermittent reinforcement, occasional acknowledgement of effort or partial success that keeps the victim engaged. "You're getting closer," or "that's better than before," provides just enough hope to maintain motivation without the satisfaction of genuine achievement. This creates an addictive cycle where victims chase increasingly rare moments of validation while accepting increasingly demanding standards. Sophia experienced this in her marriage to Thomas. Early in their relationship, Thomas expressed concern about her spending habits. Sophia created a strict budget, cut unnecessary expenses, and built savings. Rather than acknowledging this improvement, Thomas shifted focus to her earnings. "The real issue is that you don't make enough money." When Sophia secured a higher-paying position, Thomas criticized her work hours. "Money doesn't matter if you're never home." When she found a better balanced job, he focused on her stress management. "You're bringing work tension home." "I realized nothing would ever be good enough," Sophia shared. Each concern wasn't actually about improving our relationship. It was about maintaining control by ensuring I never felt secure or successful. When I finally understood the pattern, I stopped playing the game. The psychological damage extends beyond the relationship itself. Many survivors develop perfectionism, anxiety, and persistent insecurity, having internalized the message that they're perpetually inadequate. Some develop analysis paralysis, becoming so afraid of failing unknown standards that they struggle to make decisions at all. Others swing to the opposite extreme, abandoning any standards for themselves after years of failing impossible external expectations. Recovery involves recognizing the manipulation for what it is, a control tactic rather than legitimate feedback or standards. This often begins with documenting the pattern of shifting expectations, helping survivors see the consistency of the manipulation rather than the perceived consistency of their own inadequacy. Many find it helpful to consult neutral third parties about whether particular standards are reasonable or excessive, rebuilding their calibration of normal expectations. Establishing internal metrics for success forms another crucial aspect of healing. After years of external validation being perpetually withheld, survivors must learn to evaluate their own efforts and achievements independently. This might involve setting concrete, measurable personal goals, celebrating progress rather than fixating on perfection, and developing relationships where success criteria are clear, stable, and attainable. Marcus described this shift in his recovery. "After my ex continuously moved the good enough boyfriend goalposts for years, I had to relearn how to measure my own worth. I started with small, concrete goals I could definitely achieve and acknowledge for myself. Eventually, I rebuilt confidence in my own assessment of whether I'm doing well in relationships rather than waiting for someone else to decide." Prevention involves recognizing early warning signs that someone might employ this manipulation. These include vague or subjective criteria for approval or acceptance, dismissal of achievements immediately followed by new requirements, histories of relationships where others never seem to measure up, and resistance to putting expectations in writing. In healthy relationships, major expectations are clearly communicated up front, achievements are genuinely celebrated, and any changing requirements are openly discussed as new considerations rather than pretending they were always the standard. For those supporting survivors, validation of actual accomplishments proves particularly powerful. Statements like that certification was a significant achievement, or "you've shown remarkable financial responsibility," directly counter the manipulator's narrative. This validation helps restore reality testing that goalpost moving deliberately damages. Organizations can combat this manipulation by implementing clear, written standards for advancement, transparent evaluation processes, and systems where multiple perspectives inform assessments rather than single authority judgments. These structural protections make it more difficult for individual manipulators to continuously shift expectations without accountability. Ultimately, moving the goalpost reveals important truths about healthy versus manipulative standards. Legitimate expectations are clear, consistent, and attainable, even when challenging. They're communicated openly rather than revealed gradually after previous requirements are met. And perhaps most importantly, meeting genuine standards results in appropriate acknowledgement and progression rather than immediate devaluation and new demands. By recognizing goalposts moving as the manipulation it is, rather than a sign of our inadequacy, we can stop playing rigged games and invest our efforts in arenas where success is actually possible. Withholding, the silent power play. Withholding is a manipulation tactic that operates in the shadows of human interaction. It involves deliberately holding back something important, information, affection, approval, or support, as a way to control another person's behavior or emotions. Unlike more obvious forms of manipulation, withholding creates invisible chains, binding victims through what's missing rather than what's present. Imagine Sarah and Tom, a couple of 3 years. Whenever Sarah does something Tom dislikes, he responds with silence. He withdraws his affection, stops sharing details about his day, and creates an emotional vacuum that Sarah desperately tries to fill. To regain his attention and affection, she changes her behavior, abandoning her own preferences and needs. Tom never explicitly demands these changes. His withholding does the work for him. This tactic is particularly effective because humans are naturally wired to seek connection and clarity. When important elements are withheld, we experience a psychological discomfort that drives us to resolve the situation, often by yielding to the manipulator's unspoken demands. Withholding appears in various forms across different relationships. In romantic partnerships, a partner might withhold physical affection, emotional intimacy, or even basic communication until they get their way. "I'm not ready to talk about it," yet becomes a permanent state, leaving important issues perpetually unresolved. In families, parents might withhold approval or love conditionally, creating children who constantly strive to earn affection that should be freely given. "I'll be proud of you when you bring home straight," as sends the message that love is something to be earned rather than received unconditionally. In workplaces, managers might withhold crucial information that employees need to succeed, creating dependency and preventing advancement. When employees don't have the full picture, they remain vulnerable and reliant on the withholding manager. Between friends, one person might withhold emotional support or deliberately keep important information secret, creating an uneven power dynamic where one friend is always at an informational disadvantage. The power of withholding lies in its deniability. When confronted, manipulators can easily claim they forgot to share information, were too busy to respond, or didn't realize their support was needed. This plausible deniability makes withholding difficult to address and easy to continue. Consider Michael, who consistently withholds information from his colleague Jessica about upcoming project deadlines. When she inevitably scrambles to complete work on short notice, he positions himself as the more organized, prepared team member. If Jessica confronts him, Michael simply says he assumed she already knew the deadlines. Over time, Jessica appears less competent to supervisors, while Michael's reputation grows, all through the simple act of withholding. The effects of withholding compound over time. Victims begin to work harder for basic consideration, normalize the absence of support or information, and develop a heightened sense of gratitude when the manipulator occasionally provides what they've been withholding. This creates a cycle where victims become increasingly dependent on crumbs of affection, information, or support that should be standard parts of healthy relationships. Breaking free from withholding manipulation requires first recognizing the pattern. When you find yourself consistently feeling confused, left out, or emotionally starved in a relationship, withholding may be at play. The next step is establishing clear boundaries about what you need and expect in a relationship, whether that's timely information, consistent communication, or reliable emotional support. Remember that healthy relationships involve mutual sharing and support. While everyone occasionally needs space or time to process emotions, consistent patterns of withholding reveal an unhealthy power dynamic rather than normal relationship fluctuations. By understanding withholding as a distinct manipulation tactic, we can better identify when it's happening and take steps to either address it directly or remove ourselves from situations where important emotional, informational, or supportive elements are consistently held hostage by those who should freely provide them. Hashtag crazy making, distorting reality through contradiction. Crazy making is perhaps one of the most psychologically devastating forms of manipulation. Also known as gaslighting with a twist, this tactic involves deliberately engaging in contradictory behaviors, making inconsistent statements, or creating confusing situations that leave victims questioning their perception, memory, and sometimes even their sanity. Unlike straightforward gaslighting, which might involve denying reality outright, crazy making thrives on unpredictability and inconsistency. The manipulator creates a world where rules, behaviors, and truths seem to change without warning, leaving the victim in a perpetual state of disorientation. Imagine Lisa, whose boss Mike praises her work enthusiastically during private meetings but criticizes the same work harshly during team gatherings. When Lisa attempts to understand this contradiction, Mike insists she's misinterpreting his feedback or being overly sensitive. Over time, Lisa begins to doubt her understanding of basic workplace interactions, becomes anxious about her performance, and stops trusting her own perceptions. The power of crazy-making lies in its ability to undermine confidence in one's most basic faculties, the ability to observe, remember, and interpret reality consistently. When someone experiences enough contradictions without acknowledgement, they begin to internalize the idea that they, not the situation, are the problem. This manipulation tactic appears across various relationships and contexts. In romantic relationships, a partner might profess deep love one day while acting completely indifferent the next, with no explanation for the shift. When questioned, they might claim nothing has changed or that the victim is imagining differences in their behavior. In families, parents might establish rules for children that change without warning or explanation, punishing kids for violating standards that weren't clearly communicated. "You should have known better" becomes a common refrain, even when expectations were never explicitly stated. In friendships, a manipulator might share secrets with others while swearing they told no one, leaving the victim feeling paranoid when information mysteriously spreads through social circles. In workplace settings, managers might give contradictory instructions, then express disappointment when employees fail to meet unexplained expectations. "That's not what I meant" becomes a constant refrain, even when employees follow directions precisely. The most skilled crazy makers maintain plausible deniability by ensuring their contradictions are subtle enough that victims struggle to clearly articulate what's happening. When confronted, manipulators might respond with statements like, "You're overthinking things, that's not what happened," or "Why are you always so confused?" Consider David, whose girlfriend Rachel regularly makes plans with him, then becomes angry when he shows up, claiming they had agreed to meet at a different time or place. When David shows her their text messages confirming the original plan, Rachel finds ways to reinterpret the messages or suggests David misunderstood her meaning. Over time, David begins to doubt his memory and comprehension, becoming increasingly anxious about making any plans at all. The effects of crazy making extend beyond momentary confusion. Victims often develop chronic anxiety, depression, and a pervasive sense of incompetence. They may withdraw from social situations, fearing they'll misinterpret interactions or appear unstable to others. They might obsessively document conversations and events to reassure themselves about what actually happened. Breaking free from crazy making requires external validation and reality checking. Trusted friends, family members, or therapists can provide crucial perspective, confirming that the contradictions are real and not imagined. Keeping records of interactions, saving emails, text messages, or journaling about conversations can also help victims maintain clarity about what actually occurred. Understanding crazy making as a distinct form of manipulation allows us to recognize when it's happening and take steps to protect our psychological well-being. By trusting our perceptions, seeking outside perspectives, and establishing distance from those who consistently create contradictions, we can preserve our sense of reality and rebuild confidence in our ability to navigate the world accurately. Hashtag passive aggression, the art of indirect hostility. Passive aggression represents a special class of manipulation, one that allows the manipulator to express negative feelings while maintaining an appearance of reasonableness or even kindness. Unlike direct aggression, which announces itself clearly through raised voices or explicit criticism, passive aggression hides hostility behind a veneer of pleasantness, making it particularly difficult to address. At its core, passive-aggressive behavior is about indirect expression of negative emotions, anger, resentment, jealousy, or disapproval, through subtle actions rather than open communication. This allows the manipulator to harm others while avoiding responsibility for the negative impact of their feelings. Imagine James, who resents his co-worker Taylor's recent promotion. Rather than expressing his feelings directly, James implements a campaign of passive-aggressive behaviors, forgetting to include Taylor on important emails, making subtle digs disguised as jokes during meetings, and completing tasks for Taylor with deliberate errors or delays. When Taylor eventually confronts James, he responds with wide-eyed innocence. "I'm so sorry you feel that way. I've been nothing but supportive." The power of passive aggression comes from its deniability. The behaviors often occur at the threshold of plausible accident or misinterpretation, making it difficult for victims to name what's happening without seeming paranoid or overly sensitive. Passive-aggressive behavior manifests in countless forms across different relationships. In romantic partnerships, a passive-aggressive person might agree to attend an event important to their partner, then sabotage it by arriving late, being visibly bored, or creating complications that cut the evening short. In workplace settings, employees might express resentment through procrastination, deliberately misunderstanding instructions, or providing malicious compliance, following directions to the letter in ways that produce poor results. Between friends, passive aggression might appear as backhanded compliments. "That outfit is so brave." Subtle exclusion from social events, or helpful advice that actually undermines confidence. In families, members might express disapproval through sighing, eye-rolling, or making pointed comments about others who share the target's characteristics. "People who talk too much really exhaust me." The most common passive-aggressive tactics include 1. Backhanded compliments that contain hidden criticism. "You look so much better than last week." 2. Deliberate inefficiency when helping others, performing tasks slowly or poorly to discourage asking for help again. 3. Subtle sabotage that appears accidental, accidentally deleting important files or forgetting crucial deadlines. 4. Silent treatment or minimal communication without acknowledging any issue. 5. Disguised criticism through just joking comments or exaggerated concern. "I'm just worried about how that outfit might be perceived in the meeting, but whatever makes you happy." Consider Maria, whose mother-in-law never directly criticizes her parenting, but consistently undermines it. She buys different foods than what Maria feeds the children, saying, "I just thought they might like some variety." She reorganizes Maria's kitchen to be helpful and gives the children different bedtimes because they seem tired. When Maria addresses these behaviors, her mother-in-law appears hurt. "I was only trying to help. Why are you so sensitive?" The impact of passive aggression extends beyond the confusion of specific incidents. Victims often find themselves in a hyper-vigilant state, constantly scanning for hidden meanings and veiled attacks. They may become increasingly insecure, wondering if they're imagining problems or overreacting to innocent comments. The inconsistency between the manipulator's friendly demeanor and harmful actions creates a cognitive dissonance that's difficult to resolve. Breaking free from passive-aggressive manipulation starts with recognizing the pattern. When you consistently feel confused, hurt, or undermined by someone who appears outwardly supportive, passive aggression may be at play. Setting clear boundaries becomes crucial, as does naming specific behaviors rather than focusing on the manipulator's intentions. Addressing passive aggression directly often means refusing to accept plausible deniability. When you say things like that, It feels undermining rather than supportive, regardless of your intention. This approach shifts focus from the manipulator's claimed motivation to the actual impact of their behavior. By understanding passive aggression as a distinct manipulation tactic, we gain the vocabulary to identify and address it directly, creating healthier relationships based on authentic communication rather than hidden hostility. Hashtag blame shifting, the evasion of responsibility. Blame shifting represents a fundamental manipulation tactic that allows someone to escape accountability for their actions by transferring responsibility to others. Unlike some other forms of manipulation that might appear complex or nuanced, blame shifting operates on a simple principle. It's not my fault. It's yours. This tactic serves multiple purposes for the manipulator. It protects their self-image by avoiding the discomfort of acknowledging mistakes or harmful behaviors. It shields them from consequences that might result from taking responsibility. Perhaps most importantly, it often leaves victims carrying emotional burdens that don't belong to them, creating confusion, self-doubt, and sometimes even self-blame. Imagine Alex, who consistently arrives late to meetings with his friend Jordan. Rather than acknowledging his tardiness, Alex creates a rotating carousel of explanations that all place responsibility elsewhere. You chose a restaurant too far from my office. You didn't remind me we were meeting today. The traffic was terrible. My boss kept me late. When Jordan expresses frustration, Alex responds indignantly. Why are you always so rigid about time? Not everything is under my control. The effectiveness of blame shifting comes from its simplicity and a natural human tendency to defend ourselves. Most people occasionally make excuses or look for external factors that contributed to their mistakes. What distinguishes manipulation through blame shifting is the consistency and absoluteness of the evasion, the complete unwillingness to acknowledge any personal responsibility, even partially. Blame shifting appears across various relationships in different forms. In romantic partnerships, a partner might blame their infidelity on the other person's behavior. If you had been more attentive, I wouldn't have needed to look elsewhere. In workplaces, employees might attribute missed deadlines to unclear instructions rather than their own procrastination. You never explained how important this was. In families, parents might blame children for causing parental stress reactions. You make me so angry when you do that, rather than I feel angry when that happens. Between friends, someone might blame others for the consequences of their own choices. You should have stopped me from drinking so much, rather than accepting responsibility for their consumption. Skilled blame shifters often employ several specific techniques. 1. Reversing victim and offender roles, casting themselves as the injured party even when they initiated harm. I yelled because you made me feel disrespected. 2. Creating impossible standards that justify placing blame on others. You should have known I didn't mean what I said. 3. Deflecting through whataboutism, bringing up unrelated issues to avoid addressing the current concern. What about that time you forgot my birthday 3 years ago? 4. Generalizing blame to abstract forces beyond anyone's control. That's just how things are in this industry. 5. Minimizing the impact while maximizing external causes. It was just a small mistake anyone would make under that much pressure. Consider Melissa, whose boyfriend Daniel consistently spends beyond their agreed budget. When Melissa raises concerns about their financial situation, Daniel responds, "You're the one who wanted to live in this expensive neighborhood. Your job doesn't pay enough. Everyone overspends sometimes. And you're being so controlling about money." After these conversations, Melissa often finds herself apologizing to Daniel, despite having raised legitimate concerns about his behavior. The impact of consistent blame shifting extends beyond individual incidents. Victims often develop a distorted sense of responsibility, blaming themselves for problems they didn't create. They might become hesitant to raise legitimate concerns, knowing they'll likely end up feeling guilty for doing so. Over time, they may lose confidence in their ability to accurately assess situations, constantly questioning whether they're being unreasonable or overly critical. Breaking free from blame-shifting manipulation requires recognizing the pattern and firmly maintaining reality-based assessments of responsibility. This might involve phrases like, "I understand you see it differently, but I need to focus on your specific actions in this situation," or there might be external factors involved, but your choices still played a central role. Healthy relationships involve shared accountability, with all parties willing to acknowledge their contributions to problems. While no one needs to accept blame for things they genuinely didn't cause, consistent patterns of deflection and responsibility avoidance signal manipulation rather than occasional human defensiveness. By understanding blame shifting as a distinct manipulation tactic, we can better identify when it's happening and hold appropriate boundaries around accountability, creating relationships built on honest assessment rather than distorted responsibility. Hashtag minimizing, shrinking others' legitimate concerns. Minimizing represents a subtle yet powerful form of manipulation that operates by reducing the perceived importance or validity of someone else's emotions, experiences, or concerns. This tactic effectively tells victims, "What you're feeling isn't significant, what happened to you isn't serious," or "Your concerns don't deserve attention." Unlike more confrontational forms of manipulation, minimizing often appears helpful or even supportive on the surface. The manipulator might position themselves as helping the victim gain perspective or not dwell on negativity. This seemingly positive framing makes minimizing particularly insidious, as victims often can't clearly articulate why these helpful comments leave them feeling invalidated or dismissed. Imagine Emma, who shares with her colleague Thomas that she's feeling overwhelmed by their manager's last-minute project changes. Instead of acknowledging her legitimate stress, Thomas responds, "It's not that big a deal. Everyone has to adjust sometimes. At least we have jobs in this economy. And you're probably just tired. Things always seem worse when you're tired." Emma leaves the conversation feeling that her concerns were trivial and that she should be able to handle workplace challenges without emotional responses. The power of minimizing lies in its ability to make victims doubt the legitimacy of their own feelings and experiences. When our emotional responses are consistently treated as overreactions, we begin to distrust our internal barometers, becoming uncertain about which feelings are reasonable and which deserve to be suppressed or ignored. Minimizing appears across various relationships in different forms. In romantic partnerships, a partner might dismiss legitimate relationship concerns. All couples argue sometimes. You're making it a bigger issue than it is. In workplaces, managers might minimize employees' challenges. Everyone has a heavy workload right now. You need to be more resilient. In healthcare settings, practitioners might downplay patient symptoms. That level of pain is quite normal. You should be able to function fine. In families, parents might minimize children's emotional experiences. You're not really scared. You're just trying to avoid bedtime. Between friends, someone might trivialize another's achievements or setbacks. It's just a community college degree, not Harvard, or it's just a dating relationship, not a marriage. Skilled minimizers employ several specific techniques. 1. Comparative minimizing that uses others' struggles to diminish current concerns. People are starving in other countries, and you're upset about this? 2. Historical minimizing that references past resilience to dismiss present difficulty. You've handled much worse before. This is nothing. 3. False perspective that frames legitimate concerns as catastrophizing. You're making a mountain out of a molehill. 4. Temporal minimizing that suggests problems will automatically resolve with time. You'll get over it soon. It's not worth discussing. 5. Attribute minimizing that blames personality traits rather than legitimate circumstances. You're just too sensitive about these things. Consider Jason, whose wife Rebecca consistently minimizes his work accomplishments. When Jason shares excitement about a successful presentation, Rebecca responds, "It's good you're happy, but it's just an internal presentation, not like you spoke at an industry conference," or "That's nice, though I'm sure everyone else does presentations too." Over time, Jason stops sharing his professional achievements, believing they're not significant enough to mention. The impact of chronic minimizing extends far beyond individual incidents. Victims often develop a habit of self-minimizing, dismissing their own feelings before others can do it for them. They might apologize preemptively when expressing emotions or qualifying statements with phrases like, "I know this isn't a big deal," but they may stop sharing significant experiences, fearing these will be treated as trivial or unworthy of attention. Breaking free from minimizing manipulation starts with recognizing the difference between genuine perspective-taking and dismissal. Healthy perspective acknowledges the full weight of current feelings while gently contextualizing them. Minimizing, by contrast, skips acknowledgement and jumps straight to reduction. Setting boundaries around minimizing might involve statements like, "I understand you think this will pass quickly, but right now these feelings are significant to me," or "I need my experience to be acknowledged before we discuss how to move forward." By understanding minimizing as a distinct manipulation tactic, we can protect our emotional reality while still remaining open to genuine perspective. Our feelings and experiences deserve recognition, even when they might eventually change or evolve with time. Hashtag invalidation. Erasing someone's emotional reality. Invalidation represents one of the most fundamentally damaging forms of manipulation, striking at the core of human experience by denying the legitimacy of someone's emotional responses, perceptions, or lived reality. While similar to minimizing, invalidation goes further. Rather than merely reducing the importance of feelings, it questions whether those feelings should exist at all. This manipulation tactic sends powerful messages. "You shouldn't feel that way, your perspective is wrong," or "your reality doesn't exist." When repeated consistently, invalidation can leave victims profoundly disconnected from their own emotional experiences, unsure what they're allowed to feel or perceive. Imagine Noah, who expresses to his father that he feels anxious about an upcoming job interview. Rather than acknowledging this natural emotion, his father responds, "There's no reason to be anxious. You're just creating problems in your head. Real men don't get nervous about these things, and you're deliberately working yourself up for attention." Noah leaves the conversation feeling that his anxiety is not only unhelpful, but somehow wrong or defective, adding shame to his already difficult emotional state. The destructive power of invalidation stems from our fundamental need for emotional recognition. Humans are social beings who develop healthy emotional regulation partly through having their feelings acknowledged by others. When our emotional experiences are consistently rejected or denied, we lose confidence in our ability to interpret our own internal states accurately. Invalidation manifests across various relationships in different forms. In romantic partnerships, a partner might dismiss legitimate jealousy or insecurity. "You're completely irrational to feel threatened by my close friendship with my ex." In families, parents might invalidate children's fears. "There's nothing scary about the dark. You're just being difficult at bedtime." In workplaces, colleagues might deny the impact of microaggressions. "No one meant anything by that comment. You're choosing to be offended." In medical settings, healthcare providers might dismiss symptoms. "It's all in your head. There's nothing physically wrong with you." Between friends, someone might negate another's perception of social dynamics. "Nobody was excluding you. You're just paranoid." Skilled invalidators employ several specific techniques. 1. Reality denial that contradicts the person's direct experience. "That's not what happened. You're remembering it wrong." 2. Emotional policing that dictates which feelings are acceptable. "You have no right to be angry about this." 3. Pathologizing that frames normal emotions as dysfunction. "Only someone with serious issues would react that way." 4. Mind reading that claims to know the victim's feelings better than they do. "You don't really feel hurt. You're just trying to manipulate me." 5. Selective comparison that uses others' responses to invalidate. "No one else had a problem with it. Why are you so affected?" Consider Aisha, whose mother consistently invalidates her career accomplishments in technology. When Aisha shares news about a promotion, her mother responds, "You're not really happy with that job. You've always wanted to be a doctor, or you think that's success, but wait until you have children. That's when you'll know real fulfillment." No matter what Aisha achieves or feels, her mother replaces Aisha's actual emotions with what she believes Aisha should experience. The long-term impact of invalidation is profound. Victims often develop emotional alexithymia, difficulty identifying and describing their own feelings. They may adopt a habit of checking with others before trusting their own reactions. Should I be upset about this? They might experience emotional numbness as a protective mechanism against having their feelings repeatedly rejected. In severe cases, chronic invalidation contributes to conditions like borderline personality disorder, where emotional regulation becomes extremely difficult. Breaking free from invalidation requires rebuilding trust in one's own perceptions and emotional responses. This often means finding validation from alternative sources, friends, therapists, or support groups who can confirm the legitimacy of one's experiences. It also involves learning to self-validate, developing an internal voice that affirms, "My feelings exist and are legitimate, even if others don't understand them." Setting boundaries around invalidation might involve statements like, "I'm not asking you to agree with how I feel, just to acknowledge that my feelings are real, or my experience may be different from yours, but it's still valid." By understanding invalidation as a distinct manipulation tactic, we can protect our emotional truth while remaining open to different perspectives. Our feelings and perceptions deserve recognition, even when they differ from others' expectations or preferences. Hashtag creating a sense of obligation. The manipulation of indebtedness. Creating a sense of obligation represents a sophisticated manipulation tactic that transforms generosity into a tool of control. Unlike more obvious forms of manipulation, this approach begins with apparent kindness or helpfulness, giving gifts, offering favors, providing support, but with an unspoken expectation of disproportionate returns. This creates an imbalanced emotional ledger where victims perpetually feel indebted, making it difficult to refuse future requests. The manipulator operates on an unspoken principle: "I did something for you, so now you owe me," indefinitely. What makes this tactic particularly effective is its exploitation of natural human tendencies toward reciprocity and gratitude, social values generally considered positive. Imagine Olivia, whose coworker Marcus constantly offers to help with her projects. He stays late assisting with her presentations, brings her coffee without being asked, and volunteers to cover her shifts when she mentions family obligations. However, when Marcus needs something, whether it's Olivia taking on his assignments, supporting his ideas in meetings, or keeping quiet about his workplace errors, he subtly references his past generosity. "After all I've done for you, this one small thing shouldn't be an issue." Olivia finds herself agreeing to requests she's uncomfortable with, feeling she has no right to refuse someone who has been so helpful. The power of obligation-based manipulation lies in its moral leverage. Most people want to see themselves as appreciative and fair, not as selfish takers who accept help without reciprocation. Manipulators exploit this self-image, making victims feel that boundaries or refusals reflect poor character rather than legitimate self-protection. This manipulation tactic appears across various relationships in different forms. In romantic partnerships, a partner might perform excessive favors or make grand gestures, then use this history to control the other's behavior. "After everything I've done for you, how could you want to spend time with your friends instead of me?" In families, parents might remind children of sacrifices made for them. I gave up my career to raise you, and this is how you repay me, by choosing your own college major." In friendships, someone might offer unwanted help, then expect outsized loyalty. "I helped you move last year. The least you could do is let me stay at your place for a few months." In workplace relationships, a senior colleague might provide mentorship with strings attached. "I've taught you everything you know. Now you need to support my proposal, even if you disagree with it." Skilled manipulators employing obligation often use several specific approaches. 1. Unsolicited generosity that creates debt without consent, giving elaborate gifts that weren't requested but create immediate obligation. 2. Sacrifice highlighting that emphasizes the cost or difficulty of their help. "I stayed up all night finishing this for you." 3. Scorekeeping that maintains a detailed mental ledger of all assistance provided, readily available for reference. 4. Disproportionate exchange expectations where small favors supposedly justify major requests in return. 5. Obligation inheritance, where help provided to one family member creates expected debt from others. I helped your sister through college, so you should let me live with you. Consider Elena, whose mother-in-law Barbara consistently offers to babysit without being asked. When Elena mentions she's found a reliable babysitter, Barbara responds with hurt. Why would you pay a stranger when I'm happy to help? However, after each babysitting session, Barbara shares detailed opinions about Elena's parenting, housing decisions, and career choices. If Elena politely establishes boundaries, Barbara immediately references her babysitting. I give so much to this family, and I can't even offer a suggestion. Over time, Elena finds herself accepting Barbara's intrusive advice and criticism, feeling she has no right to object given Barbara's generosity. The long-term impact of obligation-based manipulation extends beyond specific favors or requests. Victims often develop a distorted sense of relationship equity, believing they must constantly pay back the manipulator while never achieving balance. They may feel perpetually guilty, as though they're always falling short of appropriate gratitude. Their decision-making becomes compromised as choices are evaluated not by what's best for them, but by what they owe to others. Breaking free from this manipulation requires recognizing the difference between healthy reciprocity and manufactured obligation. In balanced relationships, help is freely given without expectation of specific returns. Favors don't create perpetual debt, and the ability to say no remains intact regardless of past exchanges. Setting boundaries around obligation might involve statements like, I appreciate your help, but need to make this decision based on what works for me. Or, thank you for offering, but I'm comfortable handling this myself. By understanding obligation as a distinct manipulation tactic, we can accept genuine help while remaining alert to situations where generosity comes with hidden costs, creating relationships based on mutual respect rather than emotional indebtedness. #dog whistling, the hidden language of manipulators. Dog whistling in interpersonal relationships represents a particularly insidious form of manipulation involving statements with dual meanings. An innocent surface interpretation available to most listeners in a second, often harmful meaning understood only by specific targets. Unlike its political counterpart, interpersonal dog whistling typically aims to control, undermine, or destabilize specific individuals while maintaining plausible deniability. This tactic operates like its namesake. Just as a dog whistle produces sounds audible to dogs, but not humans, these communications deliver messages that only certain recipients fully understand. The manipulator can then deny any harmful intent, dismissing the target's concerns as misinterpretation or oversensitivity. Imagine Sophia, whose colleague Ryan frequently makes comments during team meetings like, some people might struggle with this project's complexity, while making brief eye contact with her. While seemingly a general observation, both Sophia and Ryan know he's specifically questioning her competence. When Sophia later addresses this pattern, Ryan responds with innocence. I was talking about the project in general, not you specifically. Why would you assume that? The effectiveness of dog whistling comes from its ambiguity. The target recognizes the hidden message based on shared history, context, or delivery, but this subtle layer remains invisible to others. This isolation is particularly damaging. When the target tries to explain their experience, they often appear paranoid or oversensitive because others only perceive the innocent surface meaning. Interpersonal dog whistling appears across various relationships in different forms.